This video is audio content only. It does not contain any video footage or images. If you are expecting visual content, please be aware. This is intentionally provided in an audio-only format. We recommend listening to the audio rather than watching the screen. Thank you for your understanding. Welcome to this fascinating journey through the history of spinach. From ancient Persia to modern dinner tables, this humble leafy green has traveled across continents and centuries, shaping cuisines and cultures along the way. Today, we'll explore how spinach became a global superfood, uncover the myths and truths about its nutritional powers, and discover the surprising role it played in everything from medieval medicine to wartime propaganda. Whether you love it or hate it, spinach has earned its place in history. Let's dig in. Chapter 1. Birth in Persia. More than 2,000 years ago, in the fertile river valleys and sun-drenched plateaus of ancient Persia, farmers made a discovery that would eventually nourish civilizations across the entire world. In a region we now know as Iran and its neighboring territories, people began cultivating a leafy green plant that grew wild in their landscapes, transforming it through careful selection and agricultural innovation into what we recognize today as spinach. This chapter takes us back to those earliest days to understand how one of humanity's most nutritious vegetables first came into being. The ancient Persian Empire, stretching across what is today Iran, Afghanistan, and parts of Central Asia, possessed extraordinary agricultural knowledge. Persian farmers likely mastered sophisticated irrigation techniques, drawing water from rivers and underground channels called qanats to transform arid lands into productive gardens. The climate of this region offered something particularly valuable for plant cultivation. Warm days provided abundant sunshine, while the proximity to mountain ranges ensured adequate water resources. The soil, enriched by centuries of natural deposits from seasonal floods and volcanic activity, created ideal growing conditions for a wide variety of crops. It was in this agricultural environment that spinach made its first appearance as a cultivated food. The wild ancestor of modern spinach most likely came from a plant known scientifically as Spinachia tetrandra, though some researchers point to Spinachia turkestanica as another possible progenitor. These wild species still grow in parts of Central Asia today, bearing smaller, tougher leaves than their domesticated descendants. Ancient Persians, who were keen observers of the natural world around them, noticed these wild greens growing in their countryside. Unlike many plants that tasted bitter or were difficult to digest, these leafy specimens showed promise. The leaves, though not as tender as modern spinach, were edible and could be gathered without much difficulty. More importantly, the plants grew quickly and abundantly, even in conditions that might challenge other crops. The decision to cultivate rather than simply forage these plants marked a turning point. During the early centuries of the Common Era, Persian farmers began deliberately planting spinach seeds, tending the crops, and selecting the best plants for future cultivation. This process of domestication did not happen overnight. Generation after generation of farmers observed which plants produced the largest leaves, which had the best flavor, and which were most resistant to pests and diseases. They saved seeds from these superior specimens, gradually transforming the wild plant into something more useful and palatable. The name the Persians gave this vegetable tells us something about how they perceived it. They called it Spinach or ispanai, terms that some scholars believe derived from words meaning green hand. This poetic naming might have referred to the shape of the leaves, which can resemble an outstretched hand, or perhaps to the way the plant seemed to reach upward from the soil. The favorable growing conditions in Persia meant that spinach could be cultivated with relative ease compared to some other vegetables. The warm temperatures encouraged rapid growth, while the careful management of water through irrigation systems ensured that plants never suffered from drought. Persian farmers developed planting techniques that maximized yields. They understood the importance of timing, planting spinach during cooler months when the intense summer heat would not cause the plants to bolt and go to seed prematurely. They learned to space plants appropriately, allowing each one enough room to develop without competing for nutrients and light. Harvesting spinach in ancient Persia required careful attention and skilled hands. farmers developed meticulous methods for collecting leaves at just the right stage of maturity. Too young, and the leaves would be sparse and insubstantial. Too old, and they would become tough and bitter. The Persian approach involved selective harvesting, taking outer leaves while leaving the central growing point intact, allowing the plant to continue producing new leaves over an extended period. This technique, developed through countless growing seasons of observation and experimentation, represented agricultural knowledge of the highest order. It maximized the productivity of each plant while ensuring a steady supply of fresh greens rather than a single large harvest followed by nothing.
In Persian kitchens and gardens, spinach became more as just a source of nutrition. It evolved into an ingredient با cultural significance, appearing در traditional recipes که showcased the sophisticated culinary traditions of the Persian Empire. The ancient Persians created dishes that combined spinach with other locally available ingredients, including herbs, spices, legumes, and grains. They understood that cooking methods could transform the texture and flavor of the leaves. Some preparations involved wilting the fresh greens quickly over heat, while others incorporated spinach into stews that simmered for hours, melding flavors into complex, satisfying meals. The Persian appreciation for spinach extended beyond mere sustenance. Medical practitioners in ancient Persia recognized the plant's beneficial properties, though they understood these effects through the lens of their own medical theories rather than modern nutritional science. They noted that consuming spinach seemed to strengthen those who ate it, that it aided digestion, but it appeared to have beneficial effects on various bodily systems. While they could not have known about vitamins, minerals, or antioxidants in the way we understand them today, their empirical observations of spinach's health benefits were fundamentally sound. People who regularly consumed spinach did indeed tend to be healthier, though the ancient physicians attributed this to the plant's inherent qualities and humoral properties rather than its nutrient content.
The social role of spinach in Persian society reflected broader patterns in ancient agricultural civilizations. Unlike precious spices or rare delicacies that only the wealthy could afford, spinach was accessible to people across different social strata. A farmer could grow it in a small garden plot. A merchant's family might purchase it fresh from local markets. Even those with limited resources could benefit from this nutritious green. This democratic accessibility helped establish spinach as a staple rather than a luxury, embedding it deeply in the dietary patterns of Persian culture. Ancient Persian agricultural texts and records, though fragmentary in what has survived to modern times, provide glimpses into how seriously farmers and scholars took the cultivation of vegetables, including spinach. These documents reveal a society that valued agricultural knowledge and sought to codify best practices for future generations. Farmers who achieved particularly successful harvests earned respect in their communities. The knowledge they accumulated about planting times, irrigation schedules, and harvesting techniques was passed down through families and guilds of agricultural workers, creating a body of practical wisdom that made Persian agriculture remarkably productive for its era. Ancient Persian agricultural texts and records, though fragmentary in what has survived to modern times, provide glimpses into how seriously farmers and scholars took the cultivation of vegetables, including spinach. These documents reveal a society that valued agricultural knowledge and sought to codify best practices for future generations. Farmers who achieved particularly successful harvests earned respect in their communities. The knowledge they accumulated about planting times, irrigation schedules, and harvesting techniques was passed down through families and guilds of agricultural workers, creating a body of practical wisdom that made Persian agriculture remarkably productive for its era. The climatic advantages of the Persian homeland cannot be overstated in understanding why spinach thrived there so successfully. The region experiences distinct seasons without the extreme cold that would kill tender plants or the prolonged intense heat that would cause them to bolt prematurely. Spring and autumn, the two growing seasons most favorable for spinach, provided extended periods of moderate temperatures. The position of Persia along important trade routes meant that agricultural innovations could spread relatively quickly between communities, and successful techniques for growing spinach would have circulated through networks of farmers and merchants. As Persian civilization flourished, reaching its heights during the Achaemenid Empire and later periods, spinach cultivation became increasingly sophisticated. Farmers experimented with different varieties, selecting for characteristics that suited particular uses or growing conditions. Some varieties might have been bred for their ability to withstand slightly hotter temperatures, extending the growing season. Others might have been selected for leaf size, flavor, or resistance to common pests. This ongoing process of selection and breeding laid the groundwork for the diverse spinach varieties that would eventually spread to other parts of the world. The cultural context of ancient Persia also shaped how people approached agriculture. Zoroastrianism, the dominant religion of the Persian Empire for many centuries, emphasized the sanctity of agricultural labor and viewed cultivated gardens as places where order triumphed over chaos. In this worldview, the farmer who coaxed nutritious greens from the soil participated in sacred work, making agricultural cultivation, including spinach cultivation, a practice invested with spiritual meaning. The technical achievements of Persian spinach cultivation had implications that extended far beyond the borders of the Persian Empire. The methods developed over generations of agricultural experience, the understanding of how to manage water and soil, the techniques for harvesting and preserving seeds, all of this knowledge would eventually travel to other lands. When spinach finally began its journey beyond Persia, it carried with it not just seeds, but an entire system of agricultural knowledge developed over centuries. The farmers of neighboring regions who first received spinach from Persian traders did not just get a new plant. They inherited sophisticated techniques for cultivation that had been refined through countless growing seasons. The farmers of neighboring regions who first received spinach from Persian traders did not just get a new plant. They inherited sophisticated techniques for cultivation that had been refined through countless growing seasons. Looking back across more than 2 millennia, we can recognize the profound impact of those ancient Persian farmers who first decided that a wild leafy plant was worth cultivating. They could not have imagined that their agricultural experiments would eventually provide nutrition to billions of people across every inhabited continent. They simply saw a useful plant, applied their considerable agricultural skills to improving it, and created something that would outlast their empire. The spinach we eat today, whether fresh in a salad, cooked in a curry, or blended into a smoothie, is a direct descendant of those first cultivated plants growing in Persian gardens more than 2,000 years ago. From these Persian origins, spinach would begin a remarkable journey across continents and cultures, transforming cuisines and nourishing populations far beyond anything its first cultivators could have envisioned. Chapter 2. From Persia to the World. The story of how spinach traveled from its Persian homeland to become a global vegetable is fundamentally a story about human connection. Merchants guiding caravans along the Silk Road, ships laden with exotic goods crossing the Mediterranean, diplomatic envoys exchanging gifts between distant courts, and eventually colonists carrying precious seeds to unexplored lands. All of these movements carried spinach across thousands of miles over more than 1,000 years. The routes this humble vegetable took mirror some of the most important pathways of cultural exchange in human history, and the warm reception spinach received in each new land tells us something profound about how different civilizations shared and built upon agricultural knowledge. The first great journey spinach made from its Persian homeland headed eastward, following the Silk Road and related ancient trade routes that connected the Persian Empire with the kingdoms and empires of Asia. Sometime around the year 647 of the Common Era, spinach arrived in China, though the path it took to get there was neither direct nor simple. The vegetable traveled through Afghanistan, where Persian cultural influence ran strong, then continued eastward through mountain passes into what we now call the Indian subcontinent. Historical records suggest that the King of Nepal played a crucial role in this transmission, sending spinach as a diplomatic gift to the Chinese court during the Tang dynasty. This was not an unusual practice. Rulers frequently exchanged exotic foods, rare plants, and agricultural innovations as gestures of goodwill and demonstrations of their kingdom's sophistication. When spinach first appeared in China, it arrived as something distinctly foreign, and the Chinese made no effort to disguise its origins. They called it bokai in Mandarin, which some scholars interpret as referring to its seed-propagating nature, but more revealingly, they also knew it as the Persian vegetable, or Persian green, names that explicitly acknowledged where this new crop had come from. Chinese agricultural writers documented its arrival, noting the unusual characteristics of this leafy green that differed from their native vegetables. The Chinese were master agriculturalists in their own right, with thousands of years of farming experience and sophisticated techniques for cultivating everything from rice and flooded paddies to vegetables in intensive garden plots. They quickly adapted spinach to their own growing conditions and culinary traditions. The incorporation of spinach into Chinese cooking demonstrates how agricultural exchange enriches receiving cultures. Chinese cooks, working with their established techniques of quick stir-frying over high heat, discovered that spinach responded beautifully to this method. The leaves wilted rapidly, concentrating their flavor while retaining a pleasant texture. Within generations, spinach had become integrated into regional Chinese cuisines, prepared with garlic, ginger, soy sauce, and other distinctly Chinese flavor profiles. The speed of cooking that Chinese methods employed also helped preserve nutrients, though the cooks of that era would have judged their success by taste and texture rather than nutritional retention. From China, spinach cultivation gradually spread to other parts of East Asia, carried along trade routes and through cultural exchange with neighboring kingdoms. While spinach was establishing itself in East Asia, another major migration route was opening up, this time heading westward and southward from Persia. The rise of Arab civilization and the rapid expansion of Islamic empires in the centuries following the establishment of Islam created vast networks of cultural and economic exchange that stretched from Spain to India. Arab traders, scholars, and travelers moved along these networks, carrying with them not just goods and ideas, but also agricultural knowledge and plant specimens. These cosmopolitan merchants and intellectuals took careful notice of the crops they encountered in different regions, understanding that successful plants could be transplanted to other areas with similar climates. Arab agronomists and physicians paid particularly close attention to spinach. They recognized its nutritional value and its relative ease of cultivation, qualities that made it worth spreading to other parts of the Islamic world. Medical texts written by Islamic scholars began mentioning spinach, documenting its properties and recommending it for various health purposes. The renowned physician, known in the West as Craze, who practiced medicine in Baghdad and other major Islamic cities, included spinach in his medical writings during the 10th century. Around the same period, agricultural experts such as Ibn Washia and Kustas al-Rumi wrote treatises that discussed spinach cultivation, offering practical advice for farmers working in different climatic conditions across the Islamic world. The year 827 marked a particularly significant moment in spinach's westward journey, when Arab forces, referred to in European sources as Saracens or Moors, brought the vegetable to Sicily. This Mediterranean island became the first European territory to cultivate spinach, serving as a crucial gateway for the vegetable spread northward across the continent. With its warm climate and fertile volcanic soil, Sicily proved ideal for spinach cultivation. From this initial foothold, the green spread to other Mediterranean islands and coastal regions, carried by the same trade networks that moved spices, textiles, and other valuable commodities around the sea that Romans had once called Mare Nostrum, our sea. The Arab presence in the Mediterranean during this period facilitated an extraordinary exchange of agricultural knowledge. Crops that originated in different parts of Asia and the Middle East found new homes in Mediterranean climates, enriching the agricultural diversity of the entire region. The most dramatic transformation of spinach's fortunes in Europe occurred on the Iberian Peninsula, where Arab rule brought revolutionary changes to agriculture. When Moorish forces conquered much of what is now Spain and Portugal beginning in the 8th century, they brought with them advanced irrigation techniques, sophisticated horticultural knowledge, and numerous crops that were unknown or uncommon in Europe. Spinach arrived in Spain sometime during the 11th century, though some accounts suggest it might have appeared even earlier. The warm Spanish climate, combined with the elaborate irrigation systems the Moors had constructed, created perfect conditions for growing this Persian green. Arab agronomists working in medieval Spain didn't simply grow spinach, they studied it carefully and wrote about it extensively. The great agricultural expert Ibn al-Awwam, who lived in Seville during the 12th century, devoted considerable attention to spinach in his comprehensive agricultural treatise. He praised it enthusiastically, giving it the memorable title of Chieftain of Leafy Greens, a phrase that captures how highly this vegetable was regarded among the sophisticated farmers and cooks of medieval Islamic Spain. Ibn Hajjaj, another scholar from the 11th century, devoted an entire treatise to spinach alone, though sadly this specialized work has not survived in complete form to the present day. These writings reveal that Arab farmers in Spain had developed detailed knowledge about when to plant spinach, how to care for it during growth, when to harvest for optimal flavor and nutrition, and how to save seeds for future plantings. The popularity of spinach in medieval Islamic culture extended well beyond agricultural circles. It became a favorite vegetable in Arab Mediterranean cuisine, appearing in a variety of dishes that showcased the region's sophisticated culinary traditions. Cooks prepared spinach with nuts, dried fruits, aromatic spices, and other ingredients that reflected the cosmopolitan character of medieval Islamic civilization. These recipes often balanced sweet and savory elements, combining spinach's earthy flavor with ingredients like pine nuts, raisins, and exotic spices that had traveled along trade routes from as far away as the islands of Indonesia. The culinary techniques developed for preparing spinach in this era would later influence European cooking as Christian kingdoms gradually reconquered the Iberian Peninsula over several centuries. From Spain, spinach began its slow spread into Christian Europe during the later Middle Ages. The vegetable probably crossed the Pyrenees Mountains into France sometime during the 13th century, though documentation from this period is fragmentary. What we know with more certainty is that by the 14th century, spinach had reached both England and France, most likely arriving via Spain and then spreading through trade and cultural contacts between different European kingdoms. Medieval Europeans, like the Chinese before them, were quick to recognize spinach's value. The vegetable had several characteristics that made it particularly appealing in the medieval agricultural calendar. One quality that ensured spinach's popularity in medieval Europe was its seasonality. In an era before greenhouses, refrigeration, or global supply chains, fresh vegetables were scarce during certain times of year. Winter was particularly challenging. Root vegetables and preserved foods dominated the diet, with few options for fresh greens. Spinach, however, could be planted in early spring, growing rapidly as days lengthened and temperatures moderated. It matured much faster than many other vegetables, providing fresh, nutritious greens at a time when winter supplies were depleted and people craved something fresh after months of stored foods. This timing made spinach almost miraculous in the eyes of medieval Europeans, who celebrated its arrival each spring as a welcome sign that the hardest months were over. The first written reference to spinach in English appears in a remarkable cookbook called The Form of Curry, compiled around 1390. This cookbook, created for the royal household, demonstrates that spinach had achieved sufficient status in England to appear in recipes served to the nobility. The medieval English called it spinach or spinach, names that clearly derive from the Spanish espinaca, which in turn came from Arabic isbanach, which ultimately traces back to the original Persian term aspanach. This linguistic chain perfectly illustrates the plant's geographic journey from Persia through the Arabic-speaking world to Spain and finally to England. Each language adapted the name slightly, but the fundamental connection to the original Persian term remained recognizable across centuries and thousands of miles. Medieval European farmers, like their counterparts in Persia, China, and the Islamic world, developed their own regional variations in spinach cultivation. Northern European growing conditions differed from those in Spain or Sicily, requiring adjustments to planting times and growing techniques. In cooler, damper climates, farmers learned to watch for diseases that could afflict spinach in wet conditions. They discovered which varieties performed best in their specific regions and saved seeds from the most successful plants. Monastic gardens, which often served as centers of agricultural innovation during the Middle Ages, played an important role in spreading spinach cultivation throughout Europe. Monks, who had the education to read agricultural texts and the time to experiment with different growing methods, shared knowledge between monasteries, helping to establish spinach as a standard garden crop across the continent.
The cultural significance of spinach in Renaissance Europe reached a particular high point with the story of Catherine de' Medici. When this young Italian noblewoman traveled from Florence to France in 1533 to marry the future King Henry II, she brought with her not just her own considerable sophistication, but also Italian cooks who could prepare the foods she loved. Catherine had a special fondness for spinach, and her insistence on serving spinach at the French royal court helped transform it from a relatively common garden vegetable into a fashionable dish among the nobility. The Italian cooks in her retinue knew numerous ways to prepare spinach, reflecting the vegetable's established place in Italian cuisine. Her patronage helped popularize spinach among French aristocracy, and it led to a lasting culinary convention. Dishes prepared with spinach came to be called Florentine, a tribute to Catherine's hometown and her role in promoting the vegetable in France. This naming tradition persists in modern cooking, where eggs Florentine or chicken Florentine invariably include spinach as a key ingredient. The most dramatic geographic leap in spinach's journey came when European colonists began crossing the Atlantic Ocean to establish settlements in the Americas. Spanish conquistadors and settlers, carrying seeds and agricultural knowledge from their homeland, brought spinach to the New World during the 16th century. The vegetable adapted well to many parts of the Americas, particularly in regions with climates similar to the Mediterranean or to Northern Europe. English and other European colonists who followed the Spanish also brought spinach seeds with them, planting gardens that helped them establish self-sufficient communities in their new homes. By the early 19th century, spinach had become common enough in North American gardens to appear in seed catalogs. The year 1806 marked its first listing in American seed catalogs, where it was offered in multiple varieties for farmers and home gardeners who wanted to grow this nutritious green. The vegetables that colonists chose to bring with them to the Americas were not random. They selected plants that had proven their worth in Europe, crops that provided good nutrition, grew reliably, and fit into established cooking traditions. Spinach met all these criteria, which ensured its place in American gardens from the earliest days of European settlement. The successful establishment of spinach cultivation in North America, particularly in the United States, would eventually transform the global spinach industry. Regions like California's coastal valleys and Texas offered excellent conditions for commercial spinach production, and by the 20th century, American farmers were growing spinach on a scale that would have amazed the Persian farmers who first domesticated the plant. But that development lay in the future. During the colonial period and early years of American independence, spinach remained primarily a garden vegetable, grown on a small scale for local consumption. Throughout all these migrations, spanning more than a millennium and covering 3 continents, spinach demonstrated remarkable adaptability. It thrived in the warm Mediterranean climate of Spain and Sicily. It grew well in the cooler, damper conditions of northern France and England. It found success in the diverse climates of North America, from the relatively mild California coast to the harsher conditions of New England. This adaptability was not accidental. It reflected both the inherent flexibility of the spinach plant and the accumulated wisdom of countless farmers who had learned, over many generations, how to adjust cultivation techniques to local conditions. Each community that received spinach added its own knowledge to the collective understanding of how to grow this crop successfully. The migration of spinach also illustrates a broader pattern in agricultural history, how crops move along paths of conquest, trade, and cultural exchange, enriching the civilizations they reach. The Arabs who brought spinach to Spain and Sicily were not simply imposing their will on conquered territories. They were sharing agricultural innovations that improved nutrition and expanded dietary options for everyone in those regions.
The European colonists who carried spinach seeds to the Americas were maintaining connections to their cultural heritage while simultaneously introducing useful plants to a new environment. In each case, the movement of spinach represented not just the physical transportation of seeds, but the transmission of agricultural knowledge, culinary traditions, and cultural values that had accumulated over centuries. Understanding these migration routes helps us appreciate that the spinach we casually purchase at supermarkets or grow in backyard gardens is heir to an extraordinary legacy. Every spinach seed carries within it genetic material shaped by natural selection and human cultivation across Persian gardens, Chinese fields, Spanish huertas, English monastery gardens, and American farms. The cooking methods we use to prepare spinach draw on techniques developed by Persian, Chinese, Arab, Italian, French, and American cooks, each contributing their own innovations to the collective knowledge of how to transform this leaf into delicious, nutritious meals. The simple act of eating spinach connects us to this vast historical tapestry, linking our dinner tables to the efforts of countless farmers, traders, cooks, and plant breeders who worked across centuries and continents to bring this remarkable vegetable into our lives. Chapter 3: The Decimal Point That Changed Everything. Few vegetables have been more profoundly misunderstood than spinach. For nearly a century, this leafy green carried a reputation as an iron powerhouse that could transform weak bodies into strong ones, a belief so deeply embedded in popular culture that it shaped everything from medical practices to childhood nutrition advice. The truth, however, tells a very different story, one involving a simple clerical error, the peculiar way scientific mistakes can take on lives of their own, and the complex reality of how our bodies actually process the nutrients in the foods we eat. The origins of spinach's inflated reputation can be traced to a specific moment in 1870, when a German chemist named Erich von Wolff sat in his laboratory analyzing the iron content of various vegetables. Von Wolff was conducting careful research, measuring mineral concentrations in different foods to better understand their nutritional properties. When he tested spinach, he found that it contained approximately 3.5 milligrams of iron per 100 grams. A respectable amount, certainly, but nothing extraordinary compared to other leafy greens. However, when von Wolff recorded his findings, he made a small but catastrophic error. He misplaced a decimal point, writing down 35 milligrams per 100 grams instead of 3.5. This seemingly minor slip of the pen meant that his published results showed spinach containing 10 times more iron than it actually possessed. In the 19th century, scientific information traveled slowly and was not subject to the same rigorous peer review processes we expect today. Von Wolff's published findings entered the scientific literature without immediate challenge. Other researchers, seeing his numbers in print and having no particular reason to doubt the work of a respected chemist, began citing his figures. Medical textbooks incorporated the information. Nutritional guides repeated it. Over the following decades, the idea that spinach was exceptionally rich in iron became accepted fact, repeated so often and in so many authoritative sources that questioning it seemed unnecessary. The error had taken on a life of its own, transforming from one chemist's mistake into received wisdom. The mechanism by which this single error multiplied across the scientific and medical literature reveals the vulnerabilities in how knowledge spreads. Each citation added legitimacy to the false claim. Researchers building on von Wolff's work had no reason to repeat his chemical analysis. They simply incorporated his published figures into their own studies and recommendations. Medical professionals, trusting the scientific literature they consulted, passed the information to patients. Educators taught it to students, who would go on to teach it to their own students. This cascade of citations created what researchers studying academic urban legends now recognize as a self-reinforcing loop, where the sheer number of repetitions makes a claim appear more credible than any individual source could achieve alone. The consequences of this mistake extended far beyond academic papers. This misconception would have serious real-world consequences, including during World War I, when French military doctors administered wine fortified with spinach juice to wounded soldiers, discussed in detail in Chapter 5. The transformation of spinach from respected vegetable to cultural icon reached its peak in the 1930s, when cartoonist Elzie Chrysler Sagar chose spinach as the source of strength for his character Popeye the Sailor Man. This cartoon sailor's spinach-eating habits would profoundly shape American consumption patterns and cultural perceptions of the vegetable for generations, as explored in Chapter 4. The year 1937 brought a moment that should have corrected the decades-old mistake. Someone, history has not preserved the name of this careful researcher, decided to double-check von Wolf's original calculations. When they reviewed his work, they immediately spotted the misplaced decimal point. The correction was published in scientific journals, clearly stating that spinach contained 3.5 milligrams of iron per 100 grams, not 35. Nutrition experts updated their information. The truth was now available for anyone who cared to look for it. But the correction made almost no impact on popular consciousness. Medical textbooks that had incorporated the inflated figures for decades continued to circulate in libraries and doctors' offices. Nutritional reference guides, already in print, remained on shelves, uncorrected. Educational materials used in schools still taught the old numbers. Even when new editions of these materials were published, the updated information often failed to reach them, partly because the correction appeared in specialized scientific journals that most textbook authors and educators never consulted. The myth of spinach as an iron powerhouse had become too well established, too deeply woven into culture and belief to be easily dislodged by a mere correction in scientific literature that few outside specialist circles would ever encounter. The persistence of this myth, despite its correction, reveals something profound about how information solidifies in human cultures. The original error had 6 decades to establish itself, to be repeated in thousands of books, articles, medical consultations, and conversations. The correction, by contrast, was a dry scientific announcement that lacked the narrative power of the myth it sought to replace. Most people never heard about the correction, and even those who did often continued believing the original claim because it aligned with everything they had always heard and what made intuitive sense given spinach's established reputation. Changing minds requires not just presenting correct information, but actively displacing incorrect information that has achieved cultural momentum. The reality of iron in spinach is considerably more complex and less impressive than the myth suggested. Spinach does contain iron. The corrected figure of 3.5 milligrams per 100 grams is accurate. This is roughly comparable to what you would find in many other green vegetables. In absolute terms, you could consume a comparable amount of iron by eating a similar quantity of hamburger meat, which contains about 3.1 milligrams per 180 grams. But comparing the iron content of different foods fundamentally misses the crucial question. Not all iron is equally available to the human body. Iron exists in food in 2 different forms. Heme iron, which comes from animal sources and is readily absorbed by the human digestive system, and non-heme iron, which comes from plant sources and is absorbed much less efficiently. All of the iron in spinach is non-heme iron, meaning that even if you consume spinach, your body will only absorb a fraction of the iron it contains. Studies have demonstrated that humans absorb only about 2.8% of the iron present in spinach, a tiny fraction of what the vegetable actually contains. To put this in perspective, if you eat 100 grams of spinach containing 3.5 milligrams of iron, your body will absorb less than 1/10 of a milligram. This low absorption rate is not unique to spinach. It affects most plant-based iron sources, presenting a genuine nutritional challenge for people who rely primarily on plant foods for their iron intake. Making matters considerably worse for anyone hoping to use spinach as an iron source, the vegetable contains a substance called oxalic acid, also known as oxalate, which actively interferes with iron absorption. Oxalate binds to iron in the digestive system, forming insoluble compounds that the body cannot absorb and simply excretes. This same oxalic acid is what renders spinach its slightly bitter taste, which some people prize and others find disagreeable. Interestingly, some people have a hereditary tendency to notice this bitter taste more acutely, while others do not, which may partly explain why spinach preferences run so strongly in families. It is not merely learned behavior, but also genetic variation in taste perception. This means that spinach not only provides iron in a form that is inherently difficult to absorb, but also contains substances that make absorption even harder. The same oxalate that interferes with iron absorption also affects calcium. Although spinach contains significant amounts of calcium, about 99 milligrams per 100 grams, the body can absorb only about 5% of it because the oxalate binds to the calcium just as it binds to iron. By comparison, the body can absorb approximately half of the calcium present in broccoli, making broccoli a far more effective calcium source despite containing less of the mineral in absolute terms. The bioavailability of nutrients, not merely their presence in food, determines their actual nutritional value. This is not to say that spinach lacks nutritional value, quite the opposite. When we move beyond the iron myth and examine what spinach actually offers, we find a vegetable with genuinely impressive nutritional credentials. Spinach is exceptionally rich in vitamin A, providing more than 140% of the recommended daily value in a single 100-gram serving. It offers substantial amounts of vitamin C, vitamin K, folate, and magnesium. The vegetable contains powerful antioxidants, including beta-carotene, lutein, and zeaxanthin, compounds that help protect cells from damage and may reduce the risk of various diseases. All of this nutrition comes packaged in a remarkably low number of calories, just 23 calories per 100 grams, making spinach an excellent choice for anyone seeking nutrient-dense foods. The confusion about spinach's nutritional properties extends beyond iron to encompass how different preparation methods affect nutrient content. Many people believe that raw spinach is always more nutritious than cooked spinach, but the reality is more nuanced. Cooking does reduce the vitamin C content of spinach substantially. Boiling spinach for just 4 minutes can cut its vitamin C content in half, and longer cooking destroys even more. Folate, another important vitamin, also decreases during cooking, particularly if the spinach is boiled in water and the cooking liquid is discarded. These vitamins are water-soluble, meaning they leach out into whatever liquid surrounds the spinach during cooking. However, cooking spinach also brings benefits that are often overlooked. The heat breaks down cell walls in the spinach leaves, making certain nutrients more bioavailable. Beta-carotene, which the body converts to vitamin A, becomes more accessible after cooking. Studies have shown that cooked spinach provides significantly more vitamin A than raw spinach, precisely because cooking has freed the beta-carotene from the plant cells that contained it. The same applies to several other important compounds. Cooking also reduces the oxalate content of spinach by as much as 50%, which means that cooking the vegetable before eating it actually increases the amount of iron and calcium your body can absorb, even though the absolute amount of these minerals in the spinach may decrease slightly during cooking. The protein, fiber, zinc, and several other nutrients in spinach also become more available to the body after cooking. The spinach iron myth has become a classic example in discussions of how scientific misinformation spreads and persists. Researchers studying academic urban legends, false claims that circulate in scholarly and popular literature despite being incorrect, frequently cite the spinach case. It demonstrates how a single error can multiply through citation and repetition until it becomes seemingly unshakable fact. It shows how the time lag between an error's establishment and its correction creates an asymmetry that favors the false claim. And it illustrates the challenge of communicating nutritional science to a public that often wants simple answers to complex questions about food and health. Today, more than 150 years after von Wolf's error, and nearly 90 years after the correction was published, the myth of spinach as an iron superstar has finally begun to fade. Modern nutrition labels, widespread access to accurate nutritional databases, and better science communication have helped spread the truth. Most educated people now understand that while spinach is nutritious, it is not a particularly special source of iron. But the myth took so long to die that it shaped generations of beliefs about food and nutrition, demonstrating that correcting scientific errors requires not just publishing corrections, but actively displacing the false information from all the places it has taken root. Understanding the true nutritional story of spinach, both what it offers and what it does not, allows us to appreciate this vegetable for what it genuinely is, a nutrient-dense food that provides substantial amounts of several important vitamins and beneficial compounds, particularly when consumed as part of a varied diet prepared in different ways. It is not a miracle food that will single-handedly transform our health, nor does it contain magical properties that other vegetables lack. It is simply an excellent vegetable, one that has fed humans for thousands of years, and will likely continue doing so for thousands more, regardless of the myths that briefly surrounded it. The story of how we came to misunderstand and then gradually correct our understanding of spinach's nutritional properties is a reminder that science is a process of continuous refinement, where errors get corrected and knowledge becomes more accurate over time, even if that process sometimes takes longer than we might hope.
Chapter 4: Popeye the Sailor Man and 20th Century Consumption Trends. The year 1929 brought unprecedented changes to America. The stock market crashed in October, plunging the nation into the Great Depression and transforming the economic landscape for more than a decade. But that same year, on January 17th to be precise, something else happened that would have a surprising impact on what Americans ate. A squinting, mumbling sailor character made his first appearance in Elzie Chrysler Segar's comic strip, and this fictional figure would soon become so intertwined with spinach that the two would be inseparable in the American imagination for generations to come. Popeye the Sailor Man was not originally created to promote vegetables. Segar developed him as a supporting character in his ongoing comic strip, giving this rough-edged sailor a personality that combined working-class authenticity with surprising moments of philosophy and an unconventional sense of honor. But when Segar needed to explain the source of Popeye's remarkable strength, he made a choice that would reshape the American spinach industry. The sailor would eat spinach from a can, and this would give him the power to overcome any obstacle. The visual was simple and memorable. Popeye would squeeze a can of spinach, the contents would fly into his mouth, and instantly his muscles would bulge as he gained superhuman strength. The timing of Popeye's arrival could not have been more significant for the spinach industry. As the Great Depression deepened and millions of Americans struggled to afford basic necessities, food choices became matters of survival rather than preference. Meat, which had been a regular part of many American diets, became prohibitively expensive for families whose breadwinners had lost their jobs or seen their wages slashed. Vegetables, by contrast, remained affordable, and spinach was among the least expensive options available. A can of spinach cost pennies and could feed a family. Fresh spinach from a garden plot required only seeds and labor, resources that even the poorest families might possess. In this context of economic hardship, Popeye offered something psychologically valuable beyond entertainment. Here was a character who derived his strength not from expensive meat or exotic foods, but from humble spinach, a vegetable that anyone could afford. For parents struggling to feed their children adequately during the Depression, Popeye provided a powerful narrative tool. They could tell their children that eating spinach would make them strong like Popeye, transforming what might have been a disappointing meal of cheap vegetables into something connected to strength and heroism. This narrative proved remarkably effective. The impact on spinach consumption was immediate and dramatic. Through the 1930s, American spinach consumption increased by approximately 1/3 compared to the previous decade. This was an extraordinary shift in dietary patterns, and while multiple factors certainly contributed to it, industry observers and cultural historians have consistently pointed to Popeye as the primary driver. The character had tapped into something powerful in American culture, the desire to believe that simple, accessible foods could provide real strength and vitality. Within just a few years of Popeye's debut, spinach had become the third most popular food among American children, trailing only turkey and ice cream. For a vegetable that many children instinctively resisted eating, this represented a remarkable achievement.
The city of Crystal City, Texas, which had developed a substantial spinach growing industry in the years before Popeye's creation, recognized the commercial potential of this connection almost immediately. The town's spinach growers and canners saw their products flying off shelves as parents across America reached for cans bearing images of the cartoon sailor. In a gesture that recognized Popeye's contribution to their prosperity, the town commissioned a statue of the character, which was erected in 1937. The statue stood across from City Hall, a bronze testament to the power of popular culture to shape agricultural economics. Crystal City began calling itself the Spinach Capital of the World, a title it would maintain for decades, and it established an annual spinach festival that celebrated the crop and its famous fictional promoter. The expansion of Popeye's reach beyond comic strips amplified his influence on spinach consumption. The character made a successful transition to animated cartoons, which began appearing in theaters in the 1930s and eventually found their way to television screens in American homes. The cartoons brought Popeye's spinach-eating ritual to life in vivid animation, making the transformation from weak to strong even more dramatic and visually compelling. Children who might never have seen the comic strips could now watch Popeye squeeze open cans of spinach and immediately sprout bulging forearms, developing the strength to punch his way through impossible situations. The formula was endlessly repeatable, and the cartoons reinforced the message thousands of times across multiple generations. What made Popeye particularly effective as a promoter of spinach consumption was the specificity of his relationship with the vegetable. He did not simply advocate for eating vegetables in general or tout the benefits of a healthy diet. He had a focused, almost obsessive relationship with one particular food. The spinach always came from a can, which aligned perfectly with the industrial food production methods that were transforming American eating habits in the mid-20th century. Popeye effectively served as an unpaid spokesman for the canned spinach industry, and while Sagar and later cartoonists were not intentionally promoting any particular product, the effect on sales was undeniable. The commercial spinach industry adapted to capitalize on this cultural phenomenon. Cans of spinach began featuring Popeye's image on their labels, creating a direct visual connection between the cartoon character and the product. Parents shopping in grocery stores would face down this imagery, and their children, familiar with Popeye from comics, cartoons, or both, would recognize the character and potentially be more willing to eat the vegetable inside the can. This represented an early example of what would later be called character licensing in food marketing, a practice that would become ubiquitous in later decades, but was relatively novel in the 1930s and 40s. Interestingly, the success of Popeye in promoting spinach consumption created an unusual situation where a fictional character had measurable real-world economic effects. Spinach farmers saw their livelihoods improved because a cartoonist had made a particular creative choice. Canneries expanded their operations to meet increased demand. Workers in spinach fields and processing plants found their jobs more secure because children across America wanted to be strong like a cartoon sailor. This economic impact extended well beyond Crystal City. Other regions with climates suitable for spinach production, particularly in California, Texas, and Arizona, expanded their acreage devoted to the crop, responding to market demand that Popeye had helped create. The middle decades of the 20th century saw spinach firmly established as a vegetable associated with health and strength in American culture, thanks largely to Popeye's influence. The character appeared on television regularly through the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, ensuring that new generations of children encountered his spinach-eating antics. Parents who had grown up with Popeye in the Depression era told their own children about the character, creating a multi-generational cultural transmission of the spinach strength association. By the 1970s and 80s, survey data showed that the vast majority of Americans, when asked about spinach, would immediately think of Popeye. One study conducted around 2002 found that 94% of Americans associated spinach with Popeye the Sailor Man, a recognition rate that would be the envy of any marketing campaign. The industrial transformation of how spinach reached American consumers accelerated dramatically with the advent of frozen food technology. In 1930, around the same time Popeye was gaining popularity, an American inventor named Clarence Birdseye launched Birdseye Frosted Foods, offering a line of frozen vegetables but could be stored for extended periods without the texture and flavor degradation that plagued canned vegetables. Spinach was among the debut offerings, becoming one of the first vegetables to be commercially frozen. This technological innovation would eventually change consumption patterns significantly, but the transformation took time. Through the middle decades of the century, canned spinach remained dominant, probably because freezers were not yet universal in American homes, and because canned spinach benefited from its association with Popeye, who specifically ate spinach from cans. By the latter decades of the 20th century, American spinach consumption patterns began shifting in ways that would have surprised earlier generations. The rise of fresh produce sections in supermarkets, improved transportation and refrigeration that allowed fresh vegetables to travel long distances without spoiling, and growing interest in nutrition and health began changing how people bought and consumed spinach. Fresh spinach, which had previously been available primarily to people who grew it themselves or shopped at farmers markets, became widely available in supermarkets across the country. This fresh spinach came bundled in bunches, often with considerable dirt still clinging to the leaves, requiring thorough washing before use. Despite this inconvenience, many consumers preferred the taste and texture of fresh spinach to either the canned or frozen varieties. The 1990s brought a revolution that would transform spinach consumption more dramatically than anything since Popeye's arrival 60 years earlier. Producers began offering pre-washed, pre-cut spinach in bags, a convenience that removed one of the main barriers to fresh spinach consumption. No longer did consumers need to spend time washing away dirt and cutting stems. They could simply open a bag and use the spinach immediately, whether in salads, smoothies, or cooked preparations. The timing of this innovation coincided with broader trends toward health consciousness, convenient foods, and fresh produce consumption. The effect was dramatic. Between 1992 and 2002, American spinach consumption jumped 66%, an increase that industry analysts attributed primarily to the availability of pre-cut, bagged spinach. This shift toward fresh bagged spinach represented a significant change from the canned spinach that Popeye had made famous. Younger consumers, increasingly health-conscious and interested in foods that tasted fresh rather than processed, gravitated toward the bagged products. The emergence of baby spinach, harvested when the leaves were still small and tender, created another option that appealed to consumers who found mature spinach leaves too tough or bitter. Baby spinach worked perfectly in salads, offering a mild flavor and delicate texture that even people who claimed to dislike spinach often found acceptable. By the early 2000s, fresh spinach had overtaken canned spinach in American consumption, reversing a pattern that it held for most of the 20th century. Demographic studies of spinach consumption in the early 21st century revealed interesting patterns about who was eating this vegetable and how consumption varied across different groups. Among ethnic groups, Asian Americans showed the highest per-person consumption of spinach in 2002, likely reflecting culinary traditions in Chinese, Indian, and other Asian cuisines where spinach and similar greens had long been staple ingredients. When examined by gender and age, women over the age of 39 consumed spinach at the highest rates, while teenage girls had the lowest consumption. These patterns suggested that spinach consumption increased with age and health consciousness, and that younger people, despite Popeye's influence, were less likely to regularly include spinach in their diets. The overall numbers, while showing growth, also revealed that spinach remained a food that many Americans consumed only occasionally. On an average day in the early 2000s, only a few % of Americans ate spinach. The average American consumed just a few pounds of spinach per year, a modest quantity that suggested spinach remained occasional rather than daily part of most diets. However, these aggregate statistics masked the reality that some people ate spinach very frequently, while many others rarely or never consumed it, creating a situation where passionate spinach enthusiasts compensated for those who avoided the vegetable entirely. The commercial spinach industry had evolved dramatically over the course of the 20th century. By 2002, spinach generated hundreds of millions of dollars in annual sales in the United States, reflecting both the volume of consumption and the higher prices that fresh, pre-washed spinach commanded compared to the canned varieties that had dominated earlier decades. The geographic concentration of production had intensified, with California, Texas, and Arizona producing 98% of commercial spinach sold in the United States. These regions offered climates where spinach could be grown nearly year-round or in multiple seasons, providing a consistent supply to supermarkets across the country. The industrialization of spinach production meant that most Americans now ate spinach that had been grown on large-scale farms, processed in specialized facilities, and transported in refrigerated trucks, a system far removed from the backyard gardens and local farms that had supplied spinach in earlier eras. While Crystal City, Texas, had long enjoyed its status as the self-proclaimed spinach capital of the world, it faced competition in 1987 when Alma, Arkansas, made its own claim to the title. Alma based its claim on being home to Allen's Vegetables, where more than half of all canned spinach in the United States was processed. Like Crystal City before it, Alma erected its own Popeye statue and established an annual spinach festival in April, creating a good-natured rivalry between the two towns over which could legitimately claim to be the true spinach capital. This competition itself testified to Popeye's enduring impact on how Americans thought about spinach, as both communities recognized that the cartoon character remained the most effective symbol for promoting their local industries. Research conducted well into the 21st century continued to demonstrate Popeye's influence on children's eating behavior, even generations after the character's creation. A study conducted in 2010 in Ontario, Canada, examined kindergarten children's vegetable consumption in connection with Popeye. The researchers organized tasting parties where children were exposed to various vegetables, including spinach, and measured their willingness to eat these foods before and after being exposed to Popeye content. The results showed that children ate more vegetables, including spinach, after watching Popeye cartoons, but with an important caveat. The effect was strongest when the spinach was explicitly connected to stories of giant muscles and super strength. In other words, the character influenced children's eating primarily when adults actively reinforced the narrative that eating spinach would make them strong like Popeye. This finding suggested that Popeye functioned not as a passive influence, but as a tool that parents and educators could employ to encourage vegetable consumption, much as Depression-era parents had done 70 years earlier. The enduring legacy of Popeye's association with spinach speaks to the power of narrative and character in shaping cultural practices around food. A creative choice made by a cartoonist in 1929, choosing spinach as the source of his character's strength, rippled forward through decades, influencing consumption patterns, agricultural economics, industrial development, and family dynamics around the dinner table. The fact that the scientific basis for Popeye's spinach eating, the supposed high iron content, was based on an error ultimately mattered less than the emotional and cultural resonance of the story. Children wanted to be strong like Popeye, parents wanted their children to eat vegetables, and spinach became the bridge connecting these desires. Looking across the full arc of the 20th century, we can see how Popeye transformed spinach from merely another vegetable into a cultural icon. The character's influence outlasted the original comic strips, persisting through theatrical cartoons, television broadcasts, and eventually digital media. Even as consumption patterns shifted from canned to fresh to pre-washed bags, even as the iron myth was debunked and the nutritional understanding of spinach became more sophisticated, the association between Popeye and spinach remained fixed in American consciousness. This cultural legacy, built on a foundation of economic hardship, clever marketing, and the universal appeal of a character who found strength in simple, accessible food, ensured that spinach occupied a unique place in American food culture that no other vegetable could match. The story of Popeye and spinach is ultimately a story about how fiction can shape reality, how cultural narratives can influence material conditions, and how a simple choice by a cartoonist can echo through generations, changing what millions of people eat and how they think about the food on their plates. Chapter 5. The Physician's Green. Long before spinach appeared in supermarkets or became associated with cartoon sailors, this leafy green occupied an important place in the medical traditions of multiple civilizations. Physicians, healers, and herbalists across centuries recognized that spinach possessed properties that went beyond simple nutrition, and they incorporated the vegetable into treatments for a wide range of ailments. The story of spinach as medicine reveals how people understood health and healing in eras before modern scientific methods, tracing a path from medieval Islamic hospitals through European herbals to traditional Asian medicine. After spinach arrived in Islamic Spain during the 11th century, Arab physicians working in the great medical centers of Baghdad, Cairo, and Cordoba began systematically studying its therapeutic properties. These learned doctors inherited the Greco-Roman humoral framework, which they had refined and expanded with their own observations and innovations. They paid particular attention to digestive health, understanding that many illnesses stemmed from problems in how the body processed food. Spinach emerged as a valued treatment for patients suffering from various digestive disorders. When someone complained of stomach discomfort, sluggish digestion, or irregular bowel movements, a skilled Arab physician might prescribe regular consumption of spinach, recognizing the plant's ability to soothe the digestive tract and promote healthy function.
The medical theory underlying these prescriptions made sense within this inherited Greco-Roman framework, which understood health as a balance of different qualities and humors in the body. Spinach was classified as having cooling and moistening properties, making it valuable for treating conditions thought to arise from excess heat or dryness. A patient suffering from inflammation, for instance, might benefit from foods with cooling qualities like spinach. Someone experiencing constipation, understood as a condition of excessive dryness in the intestines, could find relief through spinach's moistening effects. Arab agronomists like Ibn al-Awam, whose agricultural expertise complemented medical knowledge, recognized spinach's therapeutic value alongside its culinary appeal. The practice of using spinach medicinally spread through medieval Europe as the vegetable itself traveled northward from Spain. By the 13th century, Saint Albert the Great, the Dominican friar whose encyclopedic knowledge encompassed both theology and natural philosophy, knew of the spinach with thorny seeds and praised its qualities. European medical texts began describing spinach as an emollient, meaning a substance that softens and soothes tissues, making it useful for various applications, both internal and external. Taken internally, spinach was thought to gently cleanse the digestive system. Its reputation as a mild laxative made it a preferred treatment for constipation, particularly valued because it worked gently rather than causing the violent purging that stronger laxatives could produce. This gentle action made spinach suitable for patients who were weak or elderly, who might not tolerate harsher treatments. In 14th century Italy, both religious and medical authorities advocated spinach consumption. Saint Catherine of Siena, not to be confused with the later Catherine de' Medici, who would bring Italian cooking to France, recommended continuous consumption of spinach for maintaining health. Her contemporary, the Catalan physician Arnaud de Villanova, included spinach prominently in his Thesaurus Pauperum, the treasure of the poor. This influential medical text aimed to make therapeutic knowledge accessible to those who could not afford expensive medicines, positioning spinach as a healing food available to common people. Arnaud's recommendations extended beyond digestive applications to encompass spinach's role in maintaining overall bodily balance. Respiratory ailments also fell within spinach's supposed therapeutic range. Medieval and Renaissance physicians sometimes recommended spinach to patients suffering from asthma, believing that the plant's cooling properties could ease breathing difficulties. The reasoning likely connected to theories about how different foods affected the production of phlegm and other bodily fluids thought to interfere with respiration. Whether spinach actually helped asthmatics remains doubtful from a modern medical perspective, but the fact that physicians prescribed it for this purpose demonstrates how thoroughly spinach had been integrated into the therapeutic arsenal of pre-modern European medicine. The Renaissance saw the flowering of herbal literature as scholars compiled systematic knowledge about medicinal plants. These herbals documented spinach's properties alongside hundreds of other plants, creating reference works that physicians and apothecaries consulted when preparing treatments.
Writers like Mrs. M. Grieve, whose 20th century compilation A Modern Herbal drew on centuries of earlier sources, would later document spinach's traditional, medicinal, culinary, cosmetic, and economic properties, preserving knowledge that stretched back through these Renaissance herbals to medieval texts. The herbals represented an attempt to systematize plant knowledge, organizing observations about how different plants affected the human body into frameworks that made sense within each era's medical understanding. The nutritional and medicinal understanding of spinach in these earlier eras was inseparable from broader theories about food and health. Medieval and early modern medical systems did not sharply distinguish between nutrition and medicine in the way modern practice does. Food was understood as fundamentally medicinal. Every substance you consumed affected your body's balance and health. A physician, considering what a patient should eat, would think about the qualities of different foods and how they would interact with the patient's specific constitutional needs and current ailments. In this context, recommending spinach was not fundamentally different from prescribing any other treatment. Traditional medicinal uses of spinach extended beyond the European and Islamic worlds. When spinach reached India and later China in the 7th century along the ancient trade routes, local medical traditions incorporated the vegetable into their own therapeutic systems. Indian Ayurvedic medicine, with its sophisticated understanding of food as medicine and its classification of substances by their effects on the three doshas, Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, found spinach particularly valuable for balancing Pitta, the dosha associated with heat and metabolism. Ayurvedic practitioners recognized spinach's cooling properties and prescribed it for conditions involving excess heat in the body, from inflammation to certain digestive disorders. The vegetable's role in promoting healthy digestion aligned well with Ayurvedic emphasis on strong digestive fire, or Agni, as the foundation of good health. Chinese traditional medicine developed its own applications for this Persian green, interpreting its effects through the lens of traditional Chinese medicine's theories about energy flow, organ systems, and the balance of yin and yang. Chinese physicians classified spinach as cooling and sweet, attributing to it the ability to nourish blood and moisten dryness, particularly beneficial for the liver and stomach meridians. They prescribed it for conditions ranging from constipation to night blindness, recognizing empirically what modern science would later explain as the effects of vitamin A and other nutrients. Each medical tradition interpreted spinach's effects through its own conceptual lens, yet the recurring theme across Islamic, European, Ayurvedic, and Chinese systems was recognition that this leafy vegetable possessed properties that could benefit human health in specific, observable ways. The 17th through 19th centuries saw the gradual transformation of European medicine from its medieval foundations toward modern scientific practice, though documentation of spinach's specific medicinal applications during this period remains sparse in the historical record. As the scientific revolution and enlightenment reshaped how physicians understood the body, traditional herbal remedies coexisted uneasily with newer chemical and mechanical theories of disease. Spinach likely continued to appear in folk medicine and home remedies even as formal medical practice evolved, its reputation as a healthful food persisting across this long transition. By the late 19th century, when nutritional science began identifying specific chemical compounds in foods, the stage was set for both genuine understanding and, ironically, the decimal point error that would dramatically inflate claims about spinach's iron content, an episode whose consequences, including desperate wartime medical applications, are discussed in Chapter 3. The legacy of spinach's medicinal uses extends into the present in subtle ways. The vegetable's reputation as a health food, while primarily built on its genuine nutritional properties, carries echoes of these older medicinal traditions. Modern nutritional science has vindicated many of the traditional observations, even while correcting the theoretical frameworks. The vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, and phytonutrients that researchers now identify in spinach do support digestive health, reduce inflammation, and contribute to overall well-being, the same benefits that medieval physicians recognized empirically, even if they explained them differently. The cooling properties that Ayurvedic and Chinese physicians noted correspond to spinach's alkaline-forming tendency and anti-inflammatory compounds. The gentle laxative effect that European doctors valued reflects the vegetable's fiber content and its support for healthy gut function. What emerges from this long medical history is a picture of spinach as a plant that people across diverse cultures recognized as beneficial to human health. The specifics of why spinach was considered therapeutic changed dramatically across time and geography, from humoral balance to dosha equilibrium, from cooling properties to vitamin content. Yet underneath these varying theoretical frameworks lay consistent empirical observation. People who consumed spinach regularly seemed to enjoy certain health benefits, particularly in digestion and overall vitality. Medieval Arab physicians, Renaissance herbalists, Ayurvedic practitioners, and Chinese doctors were all observing genuine phenomena, even when their explanations differed from modern biochemical understanding. This medical history reveals spinach as more than just a vegetable. It has been, throughout its long association with human civilization, a plant that people turn to for healing and health. From ancient Persian gardens through medieval hospital dispensaries to Renaissance herbals and traditional Asian medical texts, spinach earned its place in the therapeutic arsenal of multiple medical traditions. The knowledge accumulated slowly, passed down through centuries of careful observation, documented in medical texts, and refined through countless individual experiences of healers treating patients and patients recovering health. That we now understand spinach's properties with far greater precision and accuracy does not diminish the value of this accumulated wisdom. It simply demonstrates that human beings have always recognized, through whatever conceptual frameworks their cultures provided, that this remarkable plant contributes meaningfully to human well-being, a recognition that endures from ancient Persia to the present day. Chapter 6. China's Industrial Dominance. The transformation of spinach from a seasonal garden vegetable to a global industrial commodity represents one of the most dramatic agricultural shifts of the past century. Today, when you purchase spinach at a supermarket, you are participating in a vast international system of production, processing, transportation, and distribution that would have been unimaginable to the farmers who cultivated this crop just a few generations ago. And at the center of this transformation stands China, a nation that has come to absolutely dominate global spinach production in ways that few other countries dominate any agricultural product. Spinach production underwent a fundamental change in character during the 20th century. For most of human history, spinach was grown on small plots by individual farmers who sold their harvest locally or consumed it themselves. A farmer might plant a few rows in the spring, harvest the leaves as they matured, and that would be the extent of their spinach operation. This small-scale production meant that spinach was always seasonal and local. You ate spinach when it was growing in your region, and you did without it the rest of the year unless you had preserved it somehow. The industrialization of American agriculture in the 20th century changed this pattern completely. As transportation networks improved and refrigeration technology advanced, it became possible to grow vegetables in regions with optimal climates and ship them to markets hundreds or thousands of miles away. California emerged as the epicenter of this transformation. The state's Central Valley and coastal regions offered something remarkable: mild winters that allowed for growing cool season crops like spinach when much of the country was frozen, combined with the ability to grow warm season crops during the summer. The development of large-scale irrigation projects provided the water these crops needed in what was naturally a semi-arid landscape. By the mid-20th century, California had become America's vegetable garden, and spinach was among the crops that thrived there. Large agricultural operations began dedicating hundreds or thousands of acres specifically to spinach production. These operations bore little resemblance to traditional farms. They employed mechanized planting equipment that could sow precise rows of spinach seeds across vast fields. They used sophisticated irrigation systems that delivered water exactly where and when it was needed. They applied fertilizers and pesticides according to schedules developed through agricultural research. And when harvest time arrived, they deployed specialized machinery that could cut spinach much faster than human workers ever could. The scale of this industrialization becomes clear when we look at the geographic concentration of American spinach production. By the early 21st century, 98% of commercial spinach sold in the United States came from just 4 states: California, Arizona, New Jersey, and Texas. California alone accounted for the vast majority of this production. The Central Coast region of California, stretching through counties like Monterey, became particularly important for spinach cultivation. The cool marine influence from the Pacific Ocean created ideal growing conditions, allowing farmers to produce spinach nearly year-round. In the winter months, production shifted south to the Imperial Valley near the Mexican border, where warmer temperatures allowed continued cultivation even as the Central Coast cooled. This geographic coordination enabled California producers to supply markets continuously, eliminating the seasonal gaps that had characterized spinach availability throughout most of history. Texas production, particularly around Crystal City, which had benefited from Popeye's popularity, focused on warm season cultivation and canning operations, with Del Monte opening a major facility there in the 1940s. The processing technologies that developed alongside industrial-scale production fundamentally changed how Americans consumed spinach. The late 20th century brought innovations that removed much of the labor from spinach preparation. The 1990s saw the introduction of pre-washed, pre-cut spinach sold in bags, a development that eliminated the need for consumers to spend time washing away grit and sand, removing stems, and drying leaves. They could simply tear open a bag and use the spinach immediately. This convenience required significant industrial infrastructure. Processing facilities that could wash, cut, dry, and package spinach demanded substantial capital investment. The spinach had to be handled carefully to avoid bruising the delicate leaves. It needed to be washed in systems that used large volumes of water to remove all dirt and potential contaminants. After washing, the spinach had to be dried enough that excess moisture would not cause it to rot in the package, but not so much that the leaves would wilt. The packaging itself became a point of technological innovation. Some producers packaged spinach in regular air, while others used nitrogen gas to displace the oxygen and extend shelf life. Even refrigerated, bagged spinach maintains peak quality for only about 8 days, during which time it loses most of its folate and carotenoid content. This rapid nutrient degradation meant that efficient distribution systems became as important as the processing technology itself. The convenience and marketing of bagged spinach drove extraordinary growth in consumption. Between 1992 and 2002, American spinach consumption jumped 66%, an increase that industry analysts attributed primarily to the availability of pre-cut, bagged spinach. The introduction of baby spinach, with its smaller, more tender leaves, created another market segment that appealed to consumers who found mature spinach too tough or bitter. Suddenly, spinach was everywhere, in salads, smoothies, pasta dishes, and countless other preparations that would have been much less common when spinach required substantial preparation before use. But while American spinach production was undergoing this industrial transformation, something even more dramatic was happening on the other side of the Pacific Ocean. China, drawing on its own agricultural traditions and responding to both domestic demand and export opportunities, began ramping up spinach production on a scale that would eventually dwarf the rest of the world combined. The numbers tell a story that is almost difficult to believe. In 2002, China was already a major spinach producer, but in the decades that followed, production increased at a staggering rate. By 2018, world production of spinach had reached 26.3 million tons, and China alone accounted for 90% of this total. By 2020, production had climbed to 31 million tons, with China responsible for 92%. And by 2022, global production reached 33 million tons, with China's share at 93%. These are not the normal proportions we see in global agriculture. Many countries might lead in the production of particular crops, but few approach the level of dominance that China has achieved with spinach. To put this in perspective, in 2020, China produced approximately 28.5 million tons of spinach, while the United States, the second largest producer, managed only about 370,000 tons. Japan, the third largest producer, contributed roughly 240,000 tons. China was producing more than 75 times as much spinach as the United States, and nearly 120 times as much as Japan. This is dominance on a scale that reshapes global markets and creates dependencies that did not exist before. Several factors contributed to China's emergence as the overwhelmingly dominant spinach producer. China possesses vast areas with climates suitable for spinach cultivation. The crop grows well in many of China's agricultural regions, from the temperate north to the subtropical south. This geographic diversity means that spinach can be grown somewhere in China during almost any season. The Shandong and Jiangsu provinces, in particular, have become major spinach production centers, with their temperate climates and developed agricultural infrastructure supporting both small-scale and industrial cultivation. China has an enormous population that has traditionally consumed leafy greens as dietary staples. The domestic demand for spinach and similar vegetables provided a ready market that encouraged production. Chinese agricultural policy has consistently emphasized maximizing food production to ensure national food security and rural employment. Government initiatives included subsidies for vegetable production, investment in greenhouse facilities that extend growing seasons, and support for rural cooperatives that help small farmers access markets. Spinach, with its relatively quick growing cycle and ability to produce multiple harvests per year in some regions, fit well into this policy framework. The scale of Chinese spinach production relies on a mix of small-scale farming and larger commercial operations. In many rural areas, families still grow spinach on small plots, selling their harvest at local markets or to middlemen who aggregate the produce for larger markets. But increasingly, commercial operations have emerged that farm spinach at industrial scales, using modern inputs, mechanization, and sophisticated management techniques. These operations can supply the enormous processing facilities that prepare spinach for both domestic consumption and export. For Chinese farmers, spinach represents an attractive crop for several reasons. It grows relatively quickly, maturing in about 40 to 50 days under good conditions, which means farmers can fit multiple spinach crops into a single year, sometimes in rotation with other vegetables. The labor requirements, while substantial, are manageable for family farms that have sufficient household labor. The market for spinach in Chinese cities has remained strong as urban populations have grown and maintained dietary preferences for fresh vegetables. And for farmers near processing facilities, selling spinach for industrial use provides a reliable market that does not require traveling to city markets or dealing with retail customers. The explosion of Chinese spinach production has had profound effects on global markets. China's dominance means that global spinach supplies and prices are heavily influenced by what happens in Chinese agriculture. A disease outbreak, extreme weather event, or policy change in China can send ripples through spinach markets worldwide. At the same time, China's production has made spinach more available globally and has kept prices relatively stable despite growing demand. Chinese spinach, both fresh and frozen, has become a significant export commodity, finding its way to markets across Asia and beyond. The industrialization of spinach production, whether in California or China, has created challenges that earlier generations of farmers never faced. Food safety has emerged as a paramount concern, particularly as spinach moves through complex supply chains from farm to processing facility to distribution center to retail store. The spinach plant, with its wrinkled leaves that can trap dirt and contaminants, presents particular food safety challenges. In 2006, a massive E. coli outbreak in the United States killed 3 people and sickened more than 200 others across 26 states. The outbreak was traced to bagged spinach from California, and the resulting investigation revealed how a single contaminated field could affect consumers across an entire continent. The outbreak led to intense scrutiny of spinach production practices, new food safety regulations, and industry-wide changes in how spinach was grown, harvested, and processed. Producers now test irrigation water for pathogens, maintain careful records of which fields produced which batches of spinach, and implement protocols to prevent contamination during harvesting and processing. Some packaged spinach is exposed to radiation treatment to kill harmful bacteria. The Food and Drug Administration has approved irradiation up to 4 kilograms for fresh spinach, a level that effectively eliminates dangerous pathogens without significantly affecting the vegetable's nutritional content, flavor, or texture. This treatment adds another layer of safety, but also increases production costs. Environmental concerns also shadow modern industrial spinach production. The crop requires substantial inputs of water, which creates challenges in regions like California that face recurring droughts and competing demands for limited water resources. Fertilizer and pesticide use, while regulated, raises concerns about environmental contamination and ecosystem effects. Testing for pesticide residues has consistently shown that conventionally grown spinach contains relatively high levels of pesticide residues compared to other produce, leading food safety advocates to recommend that consumers choose organic spinach when possible. Heavy metal contamination presents another concern. Spinach can accumulate cadmium from soil, particularly in areas where soil naturally contains high cadmium levels or where industrial contamination has occurred. While this contamination rarely reaches dangerous levels in commercial production, producers must monitor soil cadmium content and avoid planting in contaminated areas. This is especially important because spinach's ability to accumulate cadmium exceeds that of many other vegetables, making it a crop that requires careful site selection. The economics of modern spinach production reflect the tensions inherent in industrial agriculture. Large-scale producers benefit from economies of scale, able to spread fixed costs across large volumes of production and negotiate better prices for inputs and services. But they also face intense price competition as retailers demand consistent supplies at low prices. The narrow profit margins mean that producers must constantly seek efficiencies, often through further mechanization and larger scale. Small and mid-sized producers struggle to compete unless they can find niche markets, organic production, specialty varieties, or local sales that command premium prices. The result has been ongoing consolidation in the industry, with production concentrating in fewer, larger operations. The packaging and marketing of spinach has become a sophisticated enterprise in itself. Walk into any American supermarket today and you will find multiple options: bunches of fresh spinach, bags of mature leaves, bags of baby spinach, organic options, conventional options, sometimes even different varieties like flatleaf or Savoy. Major brands like Dole, Fresh Express, and Earthbound Farm dominate the bagged spinach market, though much of the spinach they sell may come from the same production regions and sometimes even the same processors. The marketing emphasizes convenience, freshness, and health benefits, transforming spinach from a simple vegetable into a branded product with specific positioning in consumers' minds. Looking forward, the spinach industry faces both opportunities and challenges. Growing consumer interest in healthy eating and plant-based diets creates expanding markets for vegetables like spinach. The convenience of pre-washed, ready-to-use spinach aligns with lifestyle trends favoring easy meal preparation. At the same time, climate change threatens to disrupt production patterns, potentially shifting where spinach can be grown successfully and increasing the frequency of extreme weather events that can devastate crops. Water scarcity may limit production in traditional growing regions. Evolving food safety regulations will require ongoing investments in systems and protocols. And the geographic concentration of production, particularly China's overwhelming dominance, creates vulnerabilities in global supply chains that have become painfully evident during recent disruptions to international trade. The modern spinach industry, with China producing more than 90% of the world's supply and industrial operations supplying most of the remainder, represents a food system dramatically different from anything that existed before the 20th century. It has made spinach available year-round to billions of people who would otherwise have access only during local growing seasons. It has driven prices low enough that spinach remains affordable even for consumers with modest incomes. But it has also created a system dependent on complex supply chains, heavy resource inputs, and the continuing productivity of a small number of key growing regions. The spinach we eat today travels through this vast industrial system. It carries with it all the benefits and problems that characterize modern global agriculture. From ancient Persian gardens to modern industrial farms, spinach's journey across 2 millennia mirrors humanity's own story of innovation, migration, and transformation. We've seen how a simple leafy green traveled continents, survived a scientific error that inflated its reputation, inspired a cartoon character who changed eating habits, served as medicine across cultures, and ultimately became dominated by industrial production, concentrated in one nation. This humble vegetable reminds us that our food connects us to vast networks of history, culture, and global commerce. Every bite of spinach carries within it the accumulated knowledge of countless farmers, the influence of ancient trade routes, and the complexities of modern agriculture. As we navigate questions about food security, sustainability, and nutrition in the 21st century, perhaps we should ask, what other stories lie hidden in the ordinary foods we take for granted? Thank you for listening to this exploration of spinach's remarkable history.